G'day, welcome back to another episode of Science Radio. My name is Jesse and I am joined by longtime friend of the show and writer extraordinaire, filmmaker extraordinaire, Mark Hadley. G'day, Mark. Welcome.
I should actually have that on a business card somewhere. That's great.
Yeah, I think that's perfect.
Filmmaker extraordinaire. Yeah. It's good to be here under whatever title you like. It's great to be part of the show.
I appreciate it. Mark, you have written for us for many years about film, television, all things culture. And it's quite funny when we talk about culture and the media that we consume, a lot of the time it's within the context of something that's far away, fantastical. But there are times, I think, when these kinds of media products come close to home. And one of those instances is in the article that you recently wrote for us in the April issue of Science Magazine, Pandemics and the Problem of Pain. First of all, alliteration, excellent. So always appreciate that. But you talk about a recent film that's coming out, and I erroneously referred to this before the cameras went on 28 months later, but it's the third in a series of 28 blank later, 28 days later, 28 months later, and now 28 years later. For the uninitiated, do you want to give us a bit of an intro as to what the film's about and sort of where it kind of made your thinking go?
Sure. Well, look, to help people get a grasp of this, firstly, I just want to say before we get going, you don't have to be a fan of these zombie-like films to actually sort of see how they fit inside society. And I'm not really a big fan of this type, but 28 Days Later, directed by Danny Boyle, was a groundbreaking film. So when it came out, it was a low-budget film, but it was about a virus that had gotten out of a Cambridge university lab and how that changed people. And so people didn't become zombies, in the classic sense. Those who were infected became infected with rage. And so you had basically a whole swathe of the population behaving in homicidal ways. And that spread throughout England. And then when you go to 28 weeks later, after the infection, that's what the reference to time makes, you have a situation where the Americans are trying to actually help establish a safe zone in London so that Britain can come to terms with this outbreak and maybe re-establish, life as we know it inside of the UK, which is obviously suffering underneath this. But there's a huge failure, basically because of a whole lot of human effects, people allowing people into the safe zone because they're family members, or going out and becoming infected and then coming back in. Very, very human understandings. And what happens then is the safe zone collapses, the virus spreads, and now it's going to move throughout Europe. Now when we come to 28 years later, what we see is a transformed world. So the world actually sees itself differently, and it has come to have life in coexistence with this rage virus. And so there are communities that live in isolated ways that protect themselves from it. And in this particular one, there's a community on the island of Lindisfarne, which is a tidal island in the UK, and a father and son have to venture onto the mainland for a particular reason, which I won't give away. And they discover not just the virus, which everybody would expect, but humanity adapted to the virus. And that has changed the way that people see the value of life, and it's changed the way that people behave towards each other. And so this is not terribly unexpected, but the reason why I was interested in it is because to some degree we have all experienced this storyline. We are survivors of a pandemic, the COVID virus of 2020 and onwards, which has changed us fundamentally in the way that we behave. And so like in the same way, the 28 years later is looking at a world that has come to terms with its own mortality and this means of mass death, we also have had to come to terms with our mortality in a way that we probably wouldn't have suspected 10 years ago, that we were going to have this sort of attitude. And I put it to you, mate, how many rolls of toilet paper do you keep stocked in your house today by virtue of getting through COVID?
Far more than I did before, that's for sure.
Yeah.
It's bizarre. Your certain habits just have kicked in and haven't gone away.
Yeah, that's true. And I think that in the early days of COVID, we all started developing habits. And we actually kind of looked at it as almost like a renaissance of the human spirit. We were all forced into our homes, and so we all started learning how to knit and how to do jigsaw puzzles and how to read. People bought bikes and went bike riding all over the place. My family bought bikes. I won't say what's happened to them now, but those, like we were all doing things which, to some degree, we thought were a result, like a positive result of the pandemic. But that was early days. And in the early stages of the pandemic, and particularly in Australia, it was easy to some degree to concentrate on what we were gaining rather than what we were losing. But as the years rolled on, we changed. We found ourselves regularly tuning in for something as macabre as the death toll each day to find out how many people were infected, to find out how many people have passed away. And we became very, very serious about food supplies and basic necessities for disinfecting families. The news that somebody had become infected changed the way we related to people. They were no longer a work acquaintance, or someone we knew through the soccer club. They were a positive threat, and that was a sad outcome of living through something like that. And so when we look at films like 28 Years Later, we actually see a reflection of a hardening of a heart and a almost fatalistic approach to infections and to mass and to pandemics and to any form of mass threat to human life. Much the same way, look, I had I'm not going to give away my age here, but I had a grandfather who lived through the Great Depression. And it was said that you could always tell a person who lived through the Great Depression because they would never waste an ounce of food. There wouldn't be a thing that they'd let by. And my grandfather was like that. He was a farmer, and he saved twists of wire up until, his final days. Just nothing could be thrown away because it might have a potential use or value. And we have different ways of seeing ourselves now. So, we laugh about the toilet paper, but we see disinfectant and we see masks and we see COVID antigen tests, for flu vaccines and things like that. We see all these things in a different way. And so we've changed, as part of that. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to draw that change out in the article.
I don't know how much you've thought about this, but, it's often talked about in the broader, film context of how zombie movies have always been a cultural reflection of their time. I suppose even if you were to go back to the 60s and 70s with those old zombie movies, Night of the Living Dead and so on and so forth, how do you think zombie movies are different now to the way that they were perhaps back in a simpler time? Or are they different? Is it just that we receive them differently?
I think there are differences. When I think of the classics, I would think that the zombie movies today concentrate more on the human connections which we had. So if you take, for example, The Walking Dead, which is a very popular television series, long-form entertainment, we refer to it now. It's like you watch 2 episodes, you've watched an entire movie, and there are 9 seasons of The
So
Walking Dead.
many.
Yeah, and 2 spin-off ones recently. So, we're still interested in these things. And one of the reasons we're interested in the modern take is that we see, if you look at The Walking Dead, it's really a question about society, not a question about monsters. You get past the monsters in the first 4 or 5 episodes, and they're just a fact of existence. The real dangers are human beings. So we look at ourselves now and we think, what am I going, in terms of that storyline, what are you going to do about the guy who wants what you have? The safety that you have, the resources that you have. And so the modern storylines, in terms of pandemics and things like that, have this, I think, dominant storyline about the human relationships that are going on. You have a lot of twisting in these films about the idea of what would happen if someone close to you became a zombie. In Night of the Living Dead, it's just a chemical spill into a graveyard and people are pulling themselves out of the soil. There's no personal relationship with anybody who's, been in that graveyard or anything like that. Whereas in films like even as much as Shaun of the Dead, a spoof, a comedy, the relationships between the various people who have been infected, becomes an important factor in the storyline. So I think it's probably, the human side of it has become more questioned. And in fact, actually, I might go one step further. The early films did not really challenge the nature of God and of pain, whereas our later films have become vehicles for questioning whether or not there can be a God. So you wouldn't have seen that in the earlier films. They're still coming out of a largely Christianized American culture. But now it's not unusual to find people who have lost faith in religion, lost faith in the existence of God, simply because of the pandemic, if you like, that's going on around them. And that is disturbingly familiar.
Yeah, I suppose it's a more cynical take on humanity and what somebody is willing to do to survive or to protect the people that are close to them. But I suppose, as you mentioned, it's also a reflection on, well, if you have a world completely ravaged by, let's say, a zombie virus, what does that say about a creator? And of course, we're talking about a fictional scenario, but it's also kind of not a fictional scenario, because though people didn't turn into zombies during COVID, they still passed away. They still died, often very painfully, very slowly. And as you talk about in your article, COVID is hardly the only pandemic that we as humanity have experienced. And probably due to our modern technology and science, it's probably almost the easiest one that we've had to deal with. Obviously, there have been enormous challenges and a lot lost, not just human life, but also monetary and elsewise. But then you talk about the other pandemics throughout history and how they've claimed far more human life in a comparatively smaller world. And all of this does, I guess, lead to that question that you've alluded to a few times. How can a loving God, a creator God, a God who rejoices in the life and the flourishing of humanity, allow such things to happen? Would that be sort of an accurate depiction of the crux of the question you're asking?
Yeah, I think so. I think that if we take, for example, 28 years later, there's actually a perversion of religion that goes on inside of the film. And I think that many people see religion as just a response to our situation. I had a friend say to me recently, I was actually having a conversation with him, and I said, there's a question I've always wanted to ask you. And he said, what is it? Just ask. We're in a very relaxed, environment. And I said, why do you think you don't believe in God? And he said, I don't believe in God because I don't have any need to believe in God. I think people who believe in God have problems, in their lives, and they look at God as the solution to their problems. And so therefore, and since I have no problems, I see no need to believe in God. And I found that really, really interesting, because what effectively he was saying was that people respond to pain differently. Some people respond to pain and they seek God. Now, in earlier pandemics, whether it be the Black Death or whether it be the Spanish flu, or in fact even large terrorist events and things like that, pain has actually brought people closer to God. Whereas some people have looked at pain as an argument for the non-existence of God. And I think that that's what largely these modern zombie films are doing. They mount an argument that, this is so terrifying and so horrible and so full of pain and suffering. How could a good God allow this to happen? Now, to some degree, it's a bit of a straw man because we haven't had a zombie apocalypse, so it's hardly a real argument for there not being a God. But I don't want to be too flippant about it. We have had any amount of suffering due to AIDS or due to cyclones, the tornadoes that are tearing up America at this point in time. Suffering is a very real thing in our world. And so people, it's not flippant when people ask a question like, well, I am suffering. You are talking about a good God. How can I believe in your good God if I have nothing but pain and loss at this point in time? And so I think that that's a valid argument, and I suspect that even if I suspect you've probably got people listening to the show who hold that's one of the big challenging beliefs. And even for any serious Christian, you have to ask the question, what do we do with pain? Or what C.S. Lewis used to say, the problem of pain. How do we answer that? And I think that it's important, and I try and put an argument forward in the article itself to try and deal with our understanding of pain and why it's there.
I guess the critic, let's say, secularist, would say, if such a God existed, a good God, a loving God, a God who wanted to see humanity flourish and everybody be happy and have a good time, surely that good God would create a world that is free from pain. Or perhaps to take a step further, that God would create a world that has no potential for pain. How would you respond to somebody putting forth that kind of argument?
Yeah, look, as a closed argument, I can see where they're coming from. If God is good, it runs basically like this. If God is good, and the best possible existence is a life full of pain, well then either God is not good because he's allowing the world to actually exist in pain, or he's incapable of doing something about it, so he's not an all-powerful God. Either way, he's not a God worthy of our attention. The problem is a logical fallacy. The suggestion is, and the basis of this argument, is that pain is bad. Now, I could be really careful here because undoubtedly there are people listening to this podcast, listening to the show, who are in suffering of some form. And I don't want to in any way diminish their suffering. So what I'm going to offer is a well-intentioned understanding of where pain fits into the plan of God. And then I want to say something else at the end of it, which has actually probably got more heart in it than this logical argument. So let me deal with the logical argument first. The problem of assuming that there is no such good thing as good pain runs against our experience of life itself. So there are many different situations. We don't have to try hard to find in life where we permit pain or even seek pain, allow pain, and introduce pain into our lives for a good end. So we can understand, for example, going to the gym. We go to the gym and we suffer for an hour, and this is moderate pain, but we have a moderate good we want to bring out of it, and that is that we're going to strengthen our muscles, or we're going to increase our endurance, or something like that. We're basically going to positively affect our health. So there is a moderate good coming from a moderate pain. And so we're able to understand that. And there are lots of different things like that. You can talk about disciplining children, causing them pain for the sake of a greater good of them becoming, better adjusted and well able to become, loving and caring human beings. You can talk about pain within society itself, how we actually introduce strictures on our lives that cause us discomfort, so that we can have a better society overall. The point is that if I, in my smallness of mind, can conceive of moderately good reasons for moderate pain, then if God, a superior mind to mine, exists, by definition, he is probably capable of having superior reasons for what we would call superior pains. So the argument that the pain is meaningless, is a problem, because it's just too easily challenged by our own experience. But it's a very common one, and people throw it out there, so to speak, because pain makes us unreasonable. If you want to meet an unreasonable person, give me a toothache. I think I am suffering the world's ailments, when I have a toothache. It'll be gone soon or something like that, but you can't tell me that at the time. And maybe I'm just not reasoning well at that point in time. So, in the midst of pain, it is very, very hard to listen to an argument based on logic. Now, the argument's not a fallacy. The argument is quite true, that if you believe in a superior God, you've got to believe in a superior intellect. And if he is superior to us and we can conceive moderate reasons for pain, he can conceive even larger reasons for pain that might dwarf our understanding. Naturally, there's the argument. But let me get to something a little more towards our hearts. I think it's a problem for us to tell people, well, God has a reason. And because God has a reason, you should just, what is the equivalent? We should just suck it up. He obviously knows better than you. Sit down, don't be silly. And that, having that explanation can be as brutalizing as somebody telling you there is no God. What do I just have a God that instead of having no God, now I've got some unhelpful Christian like Mark Hadley telling me, well, listen, you've got a God who understands completely, so you should just be quiet. So I don't want to say that either. It is true that God knows better, but God doesn't offer that as an answer to our pain. What God does is he inhabits our pain. So in the same way that I can get alongside of someone in their pain and offer them some moderate degree of comfort, God inhabits human flesh in order to bring an end to pain. So more than just getting alongside of us, he takes on the burden of what causes all of the pain. I think the interesting thing about God is he's not interested in half measures. So people say, why doesn't God do something about X? And part of the problem with that sort of argument is once you've dealt with X, well, X number 2 comes along after that, and X number 3 and X number 4. God is far more intentional than that. He is basically aiming to deal with the whole basis for pain. And that requires a whole other reasoning. We actually have to understand that pain is brought about by a broken world. And so if pain is ultimately going to be dealt with, then the brokenness of the world has to be dealt with. And, if people respond more to Christian language, we would call that sin. That there is a fault line running through the heart of every human being, and that is sin. And it is basically just a rebellion against God. So unless you actually deal with that and the consequences of that, pain is just going to keep coming. And God is merciful and deals with pains as they occur. But the ultimate root cause, he inhabits human flesh to deal with that. And of course, I'm talking about Jesus. That when Jesus dies on the cross, he takes on all of the pain of the world and provides a pathway through to a new kingdom where there will be no pain, there will be no suffering, there will be no death. So God has provided an ultimate solution. And interestingly, when God, if we talk about, me getting alongside of you, for example, in some sort of suffering and helping you as best I can, God chooses to inhabit the Christian, the person who puts their faith in him to actually deal with their sin and lead them through to a life. He doesn't just say, well, hang on because this new life is coming. He actually sends his Spirit to live in the hearts of people. And there is God who has borne our pain, now bearing our suffering. So we do not grieve alone. We do not suffer alone. We are never alone. And I think that those are the more heartfelt things I would say to somebody who's actually suffering pain. The logical argument is true. God is wiser than us. But the heartfelt argument is God has not only done something about pain ultimately, but he has come to inhabit us if we choose to trust in him.
I suppose, to use a medical analogy, tell me if this is appropriate or not. I guess it's the difference between asking, if you have a disease, would you prefer a doctor to treat the symptoms or to cure the disease entirely? Like, which would you prefer? I mean, one might be, give you some relief for a time, but the other one is going to bring you ultimate relief.
Yeah, a similar situation. I had some problems with my ankles. Again, not giving away my age, but I had problems with my ankles. And for the longest time, about 2 years, I just took painkillers, because I just thought, I've got pain in my ankles, but the pain kept on getting larger and returning. And eventually I had to have surgery. And when I stood up after the surgery, quite apart from the fact that I had to rebuild some muscles, I was stunned that I could bear my own weight without actually being in pain. When we deal with the ultimate cause with God, we are ultimately stunned by the idea that that God would actually do this for us and will be with us and will bear our pains, and the pains themselves become more manageable. Now, I think that this has often resulted in people saying of Christians, "Oh, you just, I don't understand why you feel the way you do. You just must not be taking matters seriously." And that's what my friend would say, that, I don't really have problems, so I don't need God. You've got problems and you're just reaching out for something. You're not taking the matter very seriously. But I think it's because we've taken it so seriously and we've asked God to do something about our pain that we find our pains diminish in the presence of God. The relationship that we gain is far more valuable than the pain that we suffer. At least that's the perspective we come to hold. And again, I just want to be really careful here when I say that it doesn't mean that pain finishes, and it doesn't mean that pain has no significance whatsoever. Pain is, by definition, a burden to struggle through, and one which can cause great anxiety. It may be physical, it may be emotional, there may be mental pain amongst the people who are listening to us today. And all I can say is your choices are to do this journey on your own or to do it with someone who's able to carry the burdens for you. It doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to have no burdens, but the difference is hope. And I feel like that's something that we have to grasp hold of each day. I seem to be talking a lot about my age at the moment. I'm very sorry about that. I don't know. I'm probably obsessed with it. But I do remember that there was a stage in life when you would just wake up with a pain and you wouldn't worry about it too much because you knew that tomorrow it would be gone. And that was the 20s for you. That was fantastic. Yeah. When you woke up in the 30s with a particular pain, you would actually think to yourself, well, it'll be stiff for a week or something like that, but I'll be fine. Yep. I'll get over it.
I can identify with that. This is a recent thing for me.
There you go.
Semi-recent, but I'm coming to know this. Yeah.
Let me tell you where it goes from here. So somewhere around the 40s or 50s, you wake up with a pain and you realize it's not going to go away. After a time you realize you're not going to be able to do those things anymore because those things just cause you pain. And it gets a little worse than that when you wake up around the 60s. See, we're getting closer now. When you wake up around those periods, you realize that it's not just that something is wrong. It's that it's getting worse, that things are deteriorating. So whereas before you had a hope that things would get better, now you're actually facing the reality that things are going to get worse. And it might sound a little depressing, but you need something more than a solution that says, I can get you through tomorrow. or I can get
Yeah.
you through the next week, or give us a month and we'll be fine. You need something more than that. You actually need, in a world that is breaking down at so many different levels, you need something that says, I have the total solution here. And you may run out, but I'll not run out on you. You know, and so I think it's important to understand that God doesn't simply offer us a solution for something as short term as the suffering of this day, or the suffering of this month, or even the suffering of these years. But he actually offers a solution for suffering, period, and a promise of something much better, a restored world after that.
Yeah. You're getting close to such a wonderful Christian hope that we all share. In many ways, it seems so far off and such a distant future, but I'm encouraged when I see Christians and Christian groups around the world that are taking seriously this call to suffer with other people, to make a difference, to alleviate the suffering of those around us. And I'm reminded that it has to come back to this call that we have from Jesus. I'm so encouraged by the fact that Jesus doesn't just look at our pain and go, you know what, that really sucks and I'm sorry for you. But Jesus actually embodies our pain, as you've said. And during his life on earth, he lived as though he were one of us and took on not just the pains of the world on the cross, which he certainly did, but also lived a human life. And so when I think of the God that I pray to, that I worship, he's not some faraway God who, you know, kind of looks down and goes, oh, yeah, can kind of see what you're going through. I guess I can kind of get it. But it's a God who's actually lived what I've lived and has breathed in the air that I breathed, and actually has endured the same kinds of sufferings that I go through and that people like me have gone through. And the fact that he has a permanent solution, and not just I can identify with you, but I actually have a better way, is, I think, it's got to be one of the most compelling arguments for the Christian faith that there is.
I think people often think about this solution that God offers, the world that he promises, the kingdom that is coming, as though it was, you know, famously described by Marx as pie in the sky when you die. You know, and the problem is sometimes communicating the reality of that kingdom to people. And you talk about the beauty of someone getting alongside another person in pain and saying, let me try and bear this with you. And Jesus ultimately doing that. And I think that one way of looking at Jesus's miracles, and in fact the everyday miracle of people getting alongside other people and helping them in their pain, I've heard it described as opening a window onto the kingdom of heaven. You know, so in the midst of our situation, Jesus didn't do miracles like fireworks as if something just to get attention, but he actually had a specific purpose, and that was to show us how the world could be as a pain-free world. You know, and so in the miracle of a lame man learning to, you know, being made free of his disability and able to walk again, you know, we see a window on a world where there is just no lameness. You know, and and we too can participate in this. So when I get alongside of somebody and provide something as simple as a meal to someone who is struggling, you know, what I'm opening a window on is a world where there is no want.
Well, I think that is a fantastic note to leave it on. I think you provided a pretty compelling argument for the Christian camp, but I think more than that, for the Christian camp as well, you've provided pretty compelling challenge to those of us who consider ourselves people of faith. There are many great organizations out there, many great churches and many great individuals who are making this world a better place and are suffering alongside, but also providing as you said, a window into the kingdom of heaven. So I think that this article is a great starting point for those who want to take that a little bit more seriously. If you enjoyed this episode of Science Radio, Don't forget to leave us a review or a rating on the podcasting app of your choice. You can read Mark's article by going to sciencemag.com. And until next time, we will see you when we see you. Goodbye, everyone.